So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Sarah Cook, and I'm head of the Environment Programme of the UN Global Compact Network UK. I'm very excited to welcome you to the fifth session of our seven-part Net Zero Business Transformation webinar series in partnership with 103 Ventures to support companies through the transformation of their business to reach net zero in their own business and the wider community in which they operate. We are officially over the halfway mark, so we really appreciate all of those who continue to join us live for these webinars. We hope you found the journey useful so far. We are now going to be diving into the first of two webinars on developing the right conditions for net zero transformation. And today we'll be focusing on people and how to engage key internal stakeholders in the transformation process. Before we get started, a reminder on the housekeeping for the session. This session will be recorded and the recording will be emailed to you and made available on our website along with key takeaways. We have activated automatic captions, which you can choose to accept in the tools bar, but please do remember they're generated automatically by Zoom, so please forgive any typos. We are in webinar mode, which means attendees will be muted and not visible on screen throughout the session, but as you know, we very much want to hear from you, so please do comment in the chat, tell us where you're from. You can also use the chat to tell us about any technical issues you're having. And then we will have plenty of time for a live Q&A session with our panelists at the end of the session. So if you have a question you'd like to ask our experts, please submit those in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. If you don't have a question, but you want to influence what gets answered, you can use the upvote function to choose the questions you would most like answered. So next slide, please. Briefly, we'll just take a moment to remind everyone of the ongoing conflict in Gaza and what you can do to help. First of all, we urge businesses to look to the UN guiding principles to ensure that they are not complicit with human rights abuses taking place in their value chains, both in Gaza and other parts of the world. We also encourage you to consider supporting the UN agencies bringing relief to the civilians in the region. Links have been shared in the chat, so please do have a look if you can. And one more time, if you're just joining us, a very brief introduction to the UN Global Compact and what we do. We are part of the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative, with over 23,000 global participants who have made a CEO commitment to uphold our 10 principles in the areas of human rights, labour, environment, and anti-corruption. Here at the UK network, our mission is to turn this global momentum on sustainability into practical action for our over 900 business members. We're structured across three main work streams: environment, social, and governance. And we host more than 100 events a year to support our members and the wider business community here in the UK, including members-only working groups and accelerator programs. So if you're not already a member of the UN Global Compact, we'd love to have you. So please do consider joining us, and you can find more information on how to join and all about the programs we offer through the link in the chat. So as always, we would like to take a quick moment to connect today's topic to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, in particular Goals 9, 11, 12, 13 and 17. I think with this series, it's been very clear that there is so much involved. So on the one hand, there's lots to think about, but on the other, there is lots of opportunity to make an impact. For us to achieve the 2030 agenda, it's crucial that all businesses recognise their impact and are taking action to address the SDGs. So if you're interested in ways that your business can get involved, please have a look at our website for lots of resources, tools and opportunities for engagement. And if you are a UN Global Compact member, we encourage you to get involved in the Forward Faster campaign that our global team launched last year to support accelerated action on the SDGs before 2030. This campaign calls for UN Global Compact companies to publicly declare their commitments and highlight the actions they will undertake to meet the targets. So please join us, and there's more information in the chat. Okay, so hopefully everyone today will know that this is the fifth webinar in the series that we've developed in partnership with 103 Ventures to take sustainability leaders through a step-by-step journey to provide you with the necessary tools and knowledge to transform your business for net zero. In the first few sessions, we explored the business case for net zero transformation, how we can decouple growth from emissions, and how to set a transformative agenda that is integrated throughout the business and embedded in its purpose. In our last webinar, we took a deep dive into understanding the intricacies of the current net zero landscape, both within an organisation and the wider business community, in order to prepare for transformation. We explored baselining and different kinds of materiality assessments, target setting, scenario analysis, and various reporting frameworks, including ISSB, TNFD, and the Transition Plan Task Force. So today, we will now begin to explore how you can set the right enabling conditions for transformation, focusing on people as they are really at the heart of change within an organisation. We'll explore board buy-in and the tools for influence, as well as employee training for different roles and why it's important to avoid working in silos. I'm thrilled to be joined by another fantastic panel of speakers today. But before we hand over to them, just another quick look at the aims of the series and what topics still remain for the final sessions. We're getting into the home stretch, so please do remember to register for the remaining sessions if you haven't already. We know schedules are busy, but please do try to join us live for those you can. As with the other sessions, we will also suggest ways to stay engaged on these topics between webinars, and the recording, resources and key takeaways will be shared in a follow-up email. So now I'm pleased to introduce our speakers for today. I'd like to welcome, or we welcome, the lovely Kate Wolfenden, co-founder of 103 Ventures. And we're also joined today by Tina Mavraki, who's a fellow at Chapter Zero, and Celli Lloyd, who's the UK country launcher at Climate. So first, Kate will set the scene for us and introduce us to how organisations can go about embedding sustainability in their culture and throughout their workforce, and what skills are needed to do this. Then we will hear from Tina to talk more about sustainability leadership and why this is key to transformation. And this will be followed by Celli, who will talk us through employee education and what knowledge level is needed for different roles. So thank you everyone for joining today. I'm very much looking forward to this and hearing all your questions. So with that, I will hand over to Kate to get us started. Over to you, Kate.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah. Wonderful, kind introduction. My name is Kate Wolfenden, and I steward the mission of an organisation called 103 Ventures. And for those of you that have been here on the journey, thank you. And for those of you that haven't, we are now in our fifth episode, as mentioned. But yeah, next slide, please. But before we kick off today, for the people that haven't been on the journey so far, we just wanted to share a little bit on who on earth we are and why on earth we're here. Next slide, please. So first up, 103 is a specialist climate action consultancy. We intervene at systems at an industry and company scale, and our mission is to become an ever-evolving and open source toolbox to intervene in those systems to be able to create positive change. Now, if you can imagine a Mary Poppins style toolbox with many tools for creating change available to anyone, then you're tuning into our mission. Next slide, please. So right now we have 5 tools in the toolbox, 3 that work at an industry level and 2 that work at company level. Now, we don't have time to walk through all of these in detail for you today, so we just wanted to flag for you. These tools span from preparing sector initiatives for change through deep relational and field building work, to analysing and defining the systemic barriers holding back entire industries, then designing and delivering the solutions to help overcome them, right through to helping companies like you either reach net zero as a transformative company or push even further into deep systems leadership. Next slide, please. Right, enough about us and more about the topic we are going to pick up on today, people. Next slide, please. And before we begin, let us start with a bit of a reality check. If you're on this call, you've probably cared about climate for a long time. You may be early, mid, or late career, but whoever you are, you know we aren't in a great position. Politically, industrially, socially, there is a growing misalignment when what we really need is speed. Next slide, please. And it is against this emergence of this dawning reality check that both pressure and optimism gave birth to some bold and brave targets back in Glasgow for COP26. And if anyone remembers that moment, you may have remembered among the mass school protests and Greta in the spotlight, that glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, we had turned a corner. Now, fast forward to 2024, and 239 companies were removed from SBTi's website for not filling their pledges meaningfully following up, and in order to be able to have those targets approved. And thanks to a duly needed backlash against greenwashing, many companies are reverting to green hushing, meaning recognition and motivation along the journey can sometimes be hard to find. Next slide, please. So layer on top of this, oh, sorry, one more. Oh, thank you. Layer on top of this, the evolving role of the Chief Sustainability Officer and indeed the wider sustainability team. And it means these teams now need to be leaders in sustainability, strategy, business integration and reporting, all the while also handling the increasing number of external shocks and a ratcheting necessity for action. So we can be forgiven for feeling a little bit exhausted now and then. Next slide, please. Which brings us on to the focus of our presentation today, people. People are at the heart of this transformation, and it doesn't matter where you are in this. You could be the CEO, the CSO, an operations manager, or a supplier or a customer. We will all, to some degree, be rotating through this journey illustrated here. And this psychology of change and where people sit on this cycle matters, because you can't motivate someone in denial, and you can't experiment with someone in shock. Our key message here is that for all of our talk of preserving resources and saving our planet, people are arguably one of our most precious resources to invest in, because the bittersweet truth is we may have been the cause of getting us to this point, but we can't get out of it without us either. Next slide, please. Right, so what are we going to do about it then? Next slide, please, again, if that's okay. Well, first up, let's go back to a key concept from the Net Zero Transformation Report upon which this webinar series is based. And remember, we talked about then a need for a collective mindset shift, specifically from an egocentric mindset, a place where you believe you have all the answers and you can fix all the problems on your own, to an ecocentric mindset, a place where organizations embrace the ecosystem, understand their entanglement with the wider system, and are willing to recognize they don't have all the answers, all the control, and instead know they need to learn, test, and adapt their way forward. Next slide, please. And why is this important? Well, for anyone who is familiar with Donella Meadows, if you're not, she's the grandmother of system thinking. The mindset shift up here, as you'll see up on the right-hand corner of this diagram, of this illustration, demonstrates that when you're in an organization, you can set bold targets, you can raise money, you can change strategies, and you can incentivize a team. But without a mindset shift of both individuals and the collective organization, it's going to be incredibly difficult to make progress. Next slide, please. So what does changing minds look like? Well, first up, the most important thing to note is no matter what anyone tells you, a single offsite will not cut it. It takes dedicated attention to building the right enabling culture around your organization so that people can see, believe, and know their role in the change. Now, this is out of scope for what we can build into this webinar series, and believe me, we tried, but we highly recommend learning more on building a transformative culture. And I've just used this as a quick reference, but the World Economic Forum uses this framework and writes about it quite considerably, and it's a great example that you might like to refer to. So we'll pop it into the key takeaways document for you afterwards. Next slide, please. So instead, what we're going to focus on is the hard and soft wiring of a human-centered transformation and what that looks like to get out of the starting gates. So driving a human-centered transformation inside an organization is a mixture of soft wiring and hard wiring. On soft wiring, it's about ensuring your team have the right personal and professional skills and competencies, recognizing and empowering your people, and deep listening into the wider value chain and system. On hard wiring, it's ensuring integration of recognition and reward deep into the fabric of the organization, building the right board and integrating social issues into decision-making through on-the-ground policies and frameworks, which we'll hear much more about from Tina later. Next slide, please. So I think I might have put this how in a little bit earlier. We might go a little bit more into the what first before we get into the actionable hows, but we will get there, I promise. But for now, I'm going to start with is diving a little bit deeper into one of our favorite topics, and that's upskilling on the right competencies you're going to need to handle complex transformation in an era of turbulence and complexity. Now, the headline here is that some institutions are now leading the way, like Cambridge as an example, who have integrated systems thinking into their courses, and Forum for the Future, who have the School of Systems Change. But the lion's share of people have been trained more traditionally. And as a result, we have a very important skills gap between what is needed in the workplace and what teams are currently proficient in. So what are these skills? Well, first up, these are the type of skills you can't learn in textbooks. Instead, you need to feel your way into them. It's as much about working on yourselves as good humans as it is about how we deliver our work. For example, developing your muscle for empathy and deep listening means you can listen in times of conflict and find a genuinely mutually agreeable path through. Building the skill of being able to forge strong bonds of trust help build stronger teams and deeper stakeholder relationships. And resilience, both emotionally and physically, will enable leaders and teams to successfully navigate the inevitable highs and lows, the setbacks, and the downright let's start again that come as par for the course for our jobs. Now, if you're wondering where to hone these skills, many systems change courses incorporate the human element these days. But if you aren't finding it, sustainability attuned coaches for both organizations and individuals are really helpful here. Next slide, please. Now onto the organizational soft wiring. And for this one, we're talking about applied skills that can be directly taught to your team members to help them better navigate this complex path ahead. Now, it's important to note here, and this is something Celli will go into in more detail in the following sessions, not everyone needs to be trained in these skills, but for the key players at the helm of responsibility and skill delivery for this work, these skills are incredibly important. Some examples. Multi-stakeholder partnerships are essential as we enter into the difficult terrain beyond our control of Scope 3 emissions. Building a learning and sense-making practice in the organization enables teams to move and adapt more nimbly and wisely and can result in much more resilient and well-informed strategies. Being able to suitably analyze and respond to deeper and systemic risks can build resilience into the organization and also identify strategic opportunities much quicker. And as mentioned before, this suite of skills aren't taught in the usual business schools, but they can be learned fairly efficiently and easily. These are the skills that the leaders of the future will have. So ensuring your team has them will transform your ability, or your team's ability to transform. Next slide, please. Now, before we go into a more integrated view on taking action, we wanted to stop briefly on the hard wiring. We talked about the importance of business integration in previous webinars, and this becomes especially important when we look through the lens of people. We said it before, but purpose without integration is just a strapline. We're starting with number 1 on this slide. Ensuring the people of your organization have a purpose and a transformational goal they can resonate with and feel part of is incredibly important. Furthermore, seeing that deep integration down from high-level purpose right through to one undeniable motivator for our people, their pay and incentives, can instill the kind of trust and drivers you need to get through some of the most difficult journeys ahead of you. Now, having said that, building a vision and expecting reward is just part of the journey. But people need more than that. They need a structure within which to collaborate and take effective action, and they need support. On structure, what we mean by this is how will your teams organize? Clearly, not every individual will have a pivotal role in the transformation, and yet every department needs to play a role. And strategy and feedback must flow up and down these team structures smoothly and efficiently. Transformation task forces and senior or board reporting lines hardwire strategies into action. And unless teams feel supported, and that's with the right skills and expertise we just spoke about, we can, and by hardwiring these into the learning and development programs, unless we do that, they may feel more pressure than progress. And finally, as we've mentioned before, but perhaps the most critical, instituting a supportive, transformation-enabling culture will be the backbone of this entire strategy. So please do dive into the key takeaway references we mentioned before to learn more. Next slide, please. Instead now, and this is probably the more realistic how, we wanted to use a bit of time to spell out what the basic building blocks could look like on the ground in the context of building up a net zero transformation program. To do this, we've spelled out 5 key actions to support that strategy. On number 1, it's readying your individuals. So here we recommend upskilling the key actors in your organizations, as well as ensuring a basic level of understanding for all. You'll hear more on this from Celli later. Next, ensuring the vision, purpose, and goal for transformation isn't just a statement in the strategy or a website, but a pathway your teams believe in and can see their role in is a powerful foundation for action. Now, there are some excellent examples where you can build vision and values and a common purpose out there with really clever methods that we recommend many organizations to harness. The one that rings most truly to me is one called You Theory by Otto Scharmer. It's an exceptionally powerful tool to consider using internally. Now, if you haven't used it already, again, it's something that would take time for us to dive deep in for you to truly understand. So what we've decided to do instead is just pop a little bit more headline information into a slide into the key takeaways for you. And if you wanted to know more, just shout. Next, as mentioned in our Setting a Transformative Agenda webinar, create permission to act. But this time, think about it through a people lens. People are often swamped by their current workloads and paralyzed by the status quo. Recognize this when you set your agenda. Use the power of a burning platform to shock the teams out of one way of thinking, but meaningfully pave the way for them to act and be rewarded for thinking differently too. A critical point of note here is that this is where leadership from the top matters. Prove you want something different by doing it first. Be transparent if you fail and speak up to the treasured and protected truths in your organization. Because the organization won't change if the leadership continues to play by its own rules. Next, prepare your organization. This links to the power of understanding complexity session we talked through last week. Wherever possible, engage your people in this work so that they can see the complexity, but also the opportunity. The most important thing here is that the teams need to believe it's possible. So do the work, do it collectively, or engage the right themes well, so that this transformation effort can be considered both ambitious and realistic. And remember, it's their incentives at risk too. Now, going to the structure point on the last few slides, here is also where you can start building out your transformation task force and ensure the reporting lines and committee structures which feed up into management. The more effective these task forces are, and that communication between strategy setters, strategy oversight, and delivery, the more resilient and agile your strategy will become. Next, and expect more on this from our brilliant speakers later, engage, engage, engage. Engage to deep listen what your stakeholders need, of course. We covered this in the last webinar, but with your organization too as you go through the journey. All too often, sustainability and transformation initiatives can feel like secret decisions happening behind closed doors, with day, job, or even career-changing decisions free-flowing thereafter. So communicating transparently, engaging people at the level they're interested and willing matters. Because it might be that 20 to 30 people might be truly responsible for this change, but thousands will be impacted and will need to make a shift of some sort. So remember that psychology of change visual at the beginning, and remember we will need to take all people on a journey from shock or denial to acceptance and engagement. Moving on to reward and recognition, not all motivation comes from financial incentives, although we have to admit it does help. But sometimes, depending on the progress of your organization, those financial incentives can sometimes feel a bit carrot and stick. For example, if I'm trying hard, but the department of my organization isn't succeeding, it can feel a little bit like a sucker punch not to be rewarded the way we could or should be. So remember the power of simple recognition, simple acts like awards, call-outs, and benefits to celebrate and motivate your leaders and their achievements along the way. And finally, I've added this into recognition when you could argue it isn't, but for me, building a solid learning practice inside your organization is an antidote to feelings of failure. So when you are targeting transformational goals, the scale of which almost no organization has seen in their lifetime, build out your learning frameworks as fast as you can, as you can turn that sinking sense of failure and demotivation into a collective insight, and very often as much as a positive shift in strategy as a result if it's handled well. Again, this is another favorite topic of mine, and we don't have time to go deep and dive into it during the course of this webinar series. So we've just created one slide which can give you some key headlines, which will pop into the key takeaway documents for you as well. So next slide, please. Okay, so that's almost it for me. But before handing over to these two brilliant leaders on the ground, what can you do next? Next slide, please. Well, first up, as indicated, we're attempting to cover all of these important enabling condition topics in this webinar series. Today, between us, myself, our key takeaways, and my brilliant peers, we will have covered the people element of governance, culture, capacity, and skills. But if you wanted to learn more about what we referenced, it might be worth popping back to the Setting the Transformative Agenda webinar and reflecting on the people element of what we discussed there now that we've discussed this. Aside from that, we'll be diving deeper a little bit next time under the processes barrier we mentioned earlier is business integration, and one of my personal favorites, systemic innovation as well. So please do tune in. Next slide, please. Right, if you want to engage any further, 3 quick reminders of ways you can do that. 1, join in the LinkedIn community and share any unanswered questions from today. 2, are you struggling to know if you're ready for a more transformative agenda? If so, reach out. And finally, 3, do you miss having a peer group where you can safely exchange lessons and setbacks and build a path forward? We're setting up a community or a community of practice to help genuine leaders at the forefront of their practice. Next slide, please. Right, that's it from me. Happy to draw this section to a close and hand over to Sarah so we can hear from Celli and Tina delivering change on the ground. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Kate. I must confess, I do love starting the day with these sessions. The Mary Poppins Toolbox has delivered yet another dose of theory, positivity, and practical action. Thank you very much for that. So on that note, let me hand over to Tina. Tina, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, Kate. That was a wonderful presentation. I've been taking notes myself. I would love to build on the core messages that you've shared with us. And I would like to help clear out a couple of what are common misunderstandings. And one of them is that climate risk and opportunity are separate. The financial materiality of climate is something that can only be identified in an organization where leadership has the resident skills to understand them and translate them into tangible action. So to the extent that you don't have the skills and you don't have the mindset of the board to lead that conversation and to lead that transformation, you are setting yourself up for a very difficult start. I'm seeing a lot of confusion on boards at the moment. What makes sense? What doesn't make sense? How do you transform things? Do you really need to transform? Do we have any climate vulnerabilities? Well, the only way you can start addressing these questions is if you have your hard skills, as you said, your soft skills, as you said, Kate, but also you wire them into the leadership and the followership and the tone and the skills within the board. So with that brief introduction, I would like to bring to everyone's attention here today the wonderful work of Chapter Zero. And I call it wonderful because it's really penetrated the work of about 70% of the FTSE 350 boards, and that says a lot. And what the brilliant work of Chapter Zero is that it has put together lots of very practical toolkits, whether it comes down to setting your ambition, whether it comes down to understanding how it links to your business, whether it comes down to engaging the transformation internally and executing that transformation internally. Issues like how do you remunerate people in order to provide these incentives? How do you create mindsets in order to harness the dynamics that need to be harnessed? These are toolkits that are available within Chapter Zero. And to the extent that people want more technical case studies, tangible information, that's a very credible place to find them. So if we can move to the next slide, please. What is the role of non-exec directors in transition planning? No different than in any other aspect of managing an organization, except that climate transition really touches on almost every aspect of an organization. You need to understand what's the financial materiality of climate in your organization and what's the impact of the environment into your organization. These are two separate things that have to be organized properly and understood very, very carefully. So whether that's through your external engagement, whether that's your deep dive analysis of your vulnerabilities that produce a very tangible materiality assessment, a very technical, numerical materiality assessment of the organization, that's the starting point that the board should be absolutely engaged in. That is what triggers strategy. So once you understand your materiality, what does that mean? That's where we get into understanding how you change your strategy in order to fit in the new challenges and the new opportunities. In that process, which is arguably a very strenuous process for an organization, there is no way that you can manage this process and navigate through this process unless you have resident skills on the board. What does that mean in practice? I will get into the different aspects of committees, so that I can give you tangible examples of how this manifests itself in practice. All organizations should have, whether big or small, should have an audit/risk committee. In an audit committee, you need to, /risk committee, you need to understand your internal control environment. That climate materiality, what does it mean in practice in the organization? What parts of your footprint, what part of your engagement with your clients, your services with your clients, does it affect? Talking about physical risks, talking about transition risks, but also talking really in a very technical manner, in a forward-looking fashion about stranded assets, contingency plans that you need to make across your footprint, what insurance capacity you need to have in place. And insurance is a brilliant place to see the financial materiality of climate and how this is evolving. Insurance premia are going up, insurance claims are going up, insurance capacity is receding, insurance availability needs to come much further earlier in the capital planning process rather than towards the end, as we usually had it back in the teens. What about our three horizontal model we have today? We have to plan for the immediate future, and we have to look out 3 to 5 years later. How are we going to be financially sustained as an organization? That is all, climate is written all over this quest. CapEx and R&D budgets, are they congruent with the risks that the organization is running? How do we really make ourselves sustained, profitably sustained in the future? This is what climate transition is all about. It's not a question of beliefs. It's not a question of moral obligations, although I personally argue that it would be. Above all, it's about your fiduciary responsibility for the long-term success of the company, and that transcends beyond moral preferences or personal preferences. So it's deep-rooted in your duties and obligations as leadership and definitely as the board. Now, if I turn into the nominations committee, I would actually expand the role of the nominations committee to call it a nominations/talent committee. And Kate, you highlighted the core skills that need to be engaged here very, very beautifully. The Allianz Risk Barometer, which is something that we NEDS follow very closely, identifies skill shortage as the top 10 risks globally. That speaks to leadership, that speaks to the board, that speaks to executive committee, middle management, expert transition, climate transition players in the organization, and far and wide beyond. So all of a sudden, the nominations committee truly becomes a talent committee, and it truly needs to sit down and understand the company's skills map, the skills gaps, and how to address them. There are soft skills. I prefer to call them people skills because there's nothing soft about them at the end of the day. They're actually the gluing skills that produce all, that bring to play all the hard skills in the organization. And most critically, they bring to life the 3-year plan, the 3-year business plan or 5-year business plan of the organization, and bring to bear the commitments that leadership has made towards its stakeholders via a net zero pledge, via UN Global Compact commitment. When we're talking about nominations committees and when we're talking about talent committees, the most important thing here to focus on is outputs, measuring outputs. What do your climate accreditations bring to the table in practice? What is the impact of them? It's fine and good to talk about skills training, but unless there is real penetration of these skills into the wiring of the organization, we haven't made much progress then. So another thing that you need to look very closely into is talent and the impact on the company's operations. Do we have better operations as a result of the skills, the climate skills that we've created? Do we have cost savings? Do we have better connectivity between risk and the front business lines, which call risk and opportunity coming closely together? These are things that the nominations committee invariably is drawn into in order to resolve the key issues there. And turning to the remuneration committee, and that's something that I am a remuneration nerd myself, but I could not agree more with you, Kate, in saying that remuneration is a tool here. It's not what you solve for. Fundamentally, remuneration, the role of remuneration, or rather a good remuneration policy, is a short version of the company's strategy. If remuneration does not reflect the company strategy, that's a problem to begin with. That's the focus of remuneration. Climate, to the extent that climate is material, to the extent that the company has climate vulnerabilities, it's unavoidable that climate metrics have to be present and material in the remuneration formula of your executive team and naturally further down the middle management and lower management. Because
oh, sorry, Tina, it's just Sarah here. Sorry to interrupt for a second. Your sound is just cutting out slightly, so could you maybe turn your camera off just and see if that helps with the sound? Is that okay? Thank
absolutely.
you. Right, carry on. Hopefully that will be. We could hear you, but it was just cutting slightly.
Let me know how it's going. So remuneration, is it simple? Is it focused? Or do you overload your scorecards and expect everything out of very few people? The beautiful thing about remuneration is its multiplier effect in the organization. It does motivate people. So how do you maximize motivation? Through the right remuneration strategy that you use that critically reflects the climate vulnerabilities of the organization. And yes, different companies have different vulnerabilities to climate. So you have to be smart about it, but you have to be punchy, you have to be ambitious, and you have to be material within the remuneration scorecard. If you could turn to the next slide, please. This slide, and we will hopefully be sharing slides with you at the end, gives you a good understanding about how to design incentives and what is the whole journey that you have to go through, which is a continuous journey, interplaying between short-term and long-term to make sure that there's continuity between short-term incentives, short-term deliverables, long-term incentives, long-term deliverables. And you apply the right pressure points within the organization to make sure that there's alignment, continuous alignment, and togetherness. And by togetherness, really what I mean is a close cooperation between risk and opportunity. To the extent that people do not understand the close cooperation between risk and opportunity, they do leave a lot of money on the table. And that's wrong for the long-term or medium-term success of the organization. Now, turning to another aspect, which is the sustainability committee. Some people like them, some people want them, some people don't. My experience is that climate transition touches on all the aspects of their organization, which is why chief sustainability officers are in such a tough spot. They end up being mini CEOs without the clout of the group CEO. And that's why the job that they have is so tricky. And the transformation process can be a very dynamic and sometimes tricky process. The beauty of a sustainability committee is that it can help to hardwire, or in using Kate's terminology as well, softwire climate transformation in the organization. And what I mean by that, by an example, is how can you get a business line to explain to you from beginning to end how it is planning and delivering on climate transformation via different products it's launching, products that it's withdrawing, how suppliers that it has, how it engages with customers, what solutions it provides, what problems it solves for its customers, what skills it has to embrace the whole process and deliver on this plan, and what impact that has on the P&L of the organization. When you have a sustainability committee that embraces start to end of the climate transformation process, you have success. You break down, the proverbial silos, but most importantly, you give examples to the organization that this is how it's done credibly, successfully, and it speaks truly to the success of the organization. If you could turn to the next slide, please. Now, the process is a tricky process. We have to admit that this is a tricky process because it is. It is a process that is confusing. It's a process that is disruptive. And it's a process that is forced on us because physical climate risks, at least, are accelerating in the most mind-blowing way as we can see them. This is a beautiful, again, part of the Chapter 0 toolkit that talks about barriers and enablers. I'll let you digest this, but fundamentally what it talks about is, again, what Kate beautifully mentioned before about board effectiveness, leadership mindset, and dealing with uncertainty, dealing with preconceived notions, dealing with groupthink, dealing with denial, and denial is absolutely fine. You need dissenting voices in the company because that's the only way you can really discover what is really material and what is not. How, to the extent of it, of course, that it doesn't, it's rooted in data, it's rooted in facts, and it's rooted across the footprint of the organization. So then when we're talking about leadership on the board, we're talking about really, truly, we're talking about followership. What's the impact of leadership in the organization? How does it manage internal dynamics? How does it ensure that climate skills, resident climate skills, come up to the higher part of the hierarchy of the organization in order to deliver what's happening on the ground and help assess things more properly and help deliver the right decisions? We're talking about leadership that walks the floor, that is seen, that is visible in the organization. Other people call it walkabout, other people call it engagement, call it staying close to the organization, understanding the tone of the organization, the pulse of the organization, and delivering the tone of the organization. And really then what you're talking about is fundamentally when you get your skills, when you get the transformation progress in place, and when you're talking about helping end to end to guide this process, then you're really talking about board effectiveness. I was quite dismayed to see the results of the latest PwC report about board effectiveness. Climate change poses an additional challenge on what is arguably very different market conditions at the moment. You name it across the board, from inflation to geopolitics and social dissent. So board effectiveness becomes most critical than ever before. Leadership needs the board. It needs guidance. It needs alignment, and it needs a healthy direction and challenge. When you have the right toolkits, when you have the right understanding of the organization, when you have a full understanding of what your role is and how present and active you should be in the organization, then you do get board effectiveness. When you get board effectiveness, tone of the tone of the top travels successfully and effectively, and it unlocks opportunity, and it brings together risk and opportunity to deliver proper results. If I could get to the next slides, please. So I thought it made absolutely sense to talk about Chapter 0 UK here, about the 3,000 members plus that we have in non-execs and chairs. We're active in 70 plus countries through our global network. And we have 70%, at least 70% participation in the FTSE 350. The Knowledge Hub really touches on the full array of the transformation areas that the organization has to go through. And naturally, we remain at your disposal to help you guide your organizations through that process. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tina. I very much like the gluing skills, and that's a good tip. And yes, thank you. The sound was fine. That was brilliant. I mean, I must just say my people in the chat, we've Eva and Claire have kicked us off with questions, but we will have time for plenty of questions and discussion. So, oh, there we go, Richard. Well done. So please do pop your questions in. Otherwise, I will have a chance to get my own in, which would be nice for a change. So on that note, we're going to hand over to Celli, so then we can get into our questions. So Celli, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you for that, Sarah. And well, that's a hard act to follow from those two. So thank you so much. What I want to be talking about today is actually linking both of those two discussions to why training all staff and sustainability is extremely crucial, but really on how to do it. And I'm going to be talking quite fast, and I realize this is being recorded. And so pedagogically, it means that you can go back and listen to it again to be able to take any notes that you might need. My name's Celli Lloyd. I'm from Australia. My background is in chemistry. I then was a school teacher. I taught science for a few years. I did my master's in education, and then up in Finland, focused on sustainability and education. Went to the UK. I worked in transformational change, behavioral change for a sustainability consultancy. Went back to universities working on online education and pedagogy you do there. And now I've ended up here at AXA Climate. And my focus here is really looking at how can you use sustainability to train every single person in a company, but really why and how to do it. Also at my company, a lot of the people say butterfly when they want to change a slide. So if you hear me say butterfly a lot, it means changing the slide. So let's go with butterfly. So the first part that I really want to talk about is that when it comes to training, it is no different to what it was when we were doing the digital revolution 30 years ago, butterfly. If you think about it, 30 years ago when a company said we want to go online, it's not that every single person in a large company needed to know how to code in C, but everyone in the company needed to know how to use a computer. And there's no difference now with sustainability. Not everyone needs to know how to do Scope 3 emissions tracking, but everyone needs to know the basics of sustainability to create that baseline so people can talk and so that they can do it within their job. Butterfly. So the key parts about it is we need to look at why. So why sustainability needs to be in everyone. And what I want to do here is give a couple of examples how it goes into every single kind of function within a business. Butterfly. So the first area, of course, is legal, like CSRD, CSDDD, of course, the whole EU green taxonomy that everyone has to know. In the legal profession, if you don't already know what these terms mean, it's a problem. Because when it comes down to it, especially with double materiality coming up, every company will need to, depending on their size, of course, will need to start reporting on it. And what's more about this, that there'll be someone within that team that will need to know what CSRD is, but everyone within the team will at least need to understand a little bit more about it. And the reason being is if you're asking different parts of your business questions about, can I ask about this, about the carbon on that, or the impact on this, if they're not able to understand why you're asking it, what data it's for, they might be giving you the wrong kind of data and you're not doing your report well. Butterfly. Of course, the next area, of course, is marketing comms. We all know about greenwashing and greenhushing that was mentioned earlier, but these are the bigger terms. I mean, think about every single LinkedIn post, every single way that they're going to be communicating with their staff. When it comes down to it, marketing and comms really do need to have a grasp on understanding sustainability. A great example is I was just looking at a Japanese airline that is just marketing that they're providing clothes for their passengers so that they would reduce the amount of baggage they would be taking, reducing the amount of CO2 needed to take the planes, which is a ridiculous focus on the wrong part of sustainability when looking at the aviation industry. And this all came back to reflect to hitting the marketing and comms team because of their not understanding of basically the impact of what they were saying. Butterfly. A huge one, of course, comes to sales and accountants or account managers. Essentially, how many of you in this call who are a part of a sustainability team have been called into early calls? Just saying, sound is not brilliant again. I'll turn my camera off. Let's see if that works. Okay, so as I said, when it comes down to like sales and account winning, how many of you have been called into meetings so far because you're starting to meet someone from another company because they're like, oh, they might mention something about ESG. If I went to go buy a computer right now, I said, hey, I would love to have a computer with X amount of RAM and SSD kind of platform. And the person said, oh, that's a bit technical. I'm just going to get my engineers to start speaking. Well, you have to understand that that's ridiculous. All salespeople and account managers and customer relations do need some understanding of sustainability so that they can talk to their clients. Butterfly. HR, huge part. Staff retention and attraction. If someone in HR right now is hiring someone for the head of procurement, they've got two people in front, one with 15 years experience, one with say 6 years experience, but the 6 years experience person had done scope 2 scope 3 tracking of emissions for the last couple of jobs. Everyone would understand that the person with 6 years is far better for that position. But how is the person in HR meant to know without understanding the strategy in general? So HR people really do need to be onboarded as well. And lastly, of course, you've got risk and you've got your facilities management. Now with these, they need to understand the resilience and adaptation to climatic change. In 2015, both Google and Oracle had servers that went down in London, and the reason that they went down was because of a heat wave. So if your risk team or your facilities team are not preparing for these risks, you're already shooting yourselves in the foot. So the idea is that everyone within a company needs to be trained. Butterfly. But the last part that needs to be said is that it's not just compliance training, and it can't just be once off. It has to be systemic change. It has to be looked at, how do we do this not only for 1 year, but year by year and building up. Butterfly. And so now I've kind of explained why we need to focus on training. But the next part I really need to talk about is when I say training, what do I mean? I mean, we've got our A to Z of training or A to Z of understanding sustainability. Z, for example, is really Z, for example, is really at the end where it's like, I fully understand sustainability. I've probably done a course or a master's on it. And A is having no idea. Where do you need your staff to be? Let's start with Butterfly, your first 3 groups. The first group is kind of your group from, say, 1 to 8 hours. This is your group for all employees. They need to know why they need to know it, what they need to know, and how it's relevant to their goal when it comes to sustainability. This is your general culture. It's about building learning within your company and understanding, and it should be a few hours per year. Next group, which is your, say, 10 to 50 hours. This is about learning a hard skill. An example of this might be, for example, in your legal team, someone might need to know how to do a CSRD report, or for example, someone in procurement, how to do scope 3 emissions tracking. This is not something you can do as like a 5-minute little video you watch online. It might be going off and doing a far more intensive course or training to understand or to be able to perform this hard skill. This might be 1 or 2 people within each of the job functions within a company. But remember, like for example, if you had that person in legal who goes off and learns about CSRD reporting and they come back to the company, If everyone in their company doesn't know CSRD and doesn't know just what it means and why it's important, how are they able to do this report accurately and efficiently without being able to talk to people about it? So that's the 1 to 8. And of course, the last group is kind of your 100 hours. Now, this is for people, of course, in your sustainability department, but also people doing full career choices. Great example, we're working with a lot of car companies. So Renault, for example, and most car companies are saying, hey, we're going to electrify our car fleet. Now, in doing so, they realize they've got a whole lot of mechanical engineers, but not enough electrical engineers. So changing someone from mechanic to an electrical engineer is that 100 hours. But also a lot of these jobs won't exist yet. For example, there will be someone probably in the next few years within your company that will be really focused on, say, biodiversity, or should have been done a long time ago, but water footprint, like the water footprint of your product or your service, both upstream and downstream. And so these are the kind of training that you should be thinking about that is going to be far, far, far more intense and more intensive, but it might only be for a few specific people within your company. So going on, butterfly. The key points about this, I want to give you some tangible starts, like how do I actually do it? So how do I start with my training and how can I maintain it? So the first one is butterfly. When we're looking at it is who should be involved. Now there's 3 key people or 3 groups that should be involved. The first one, butterfly, is of course your HR and L&D team. When it comes down to it, they're the people who know how to do it. They're the people who understand because they probably have done GDPR training for the whole company previously, or were there when they were doing the online transformation. The next is your ESG and sustainability team. They know what needs to be studied, like what does each person need to know. And lastly, you've got, of course, you need someone from your C-suite. The reason you need someone from there is you want your board support. And more importantly, they're probably the people connected to the purse strings. Next group, you've got your part 2. So what should be covered, butterfly? When it's thinking about what should be covered, it's about the amount of time you can ask of your employees. This is a question for your HR or L&D team. For example, if you said, listen, I want to put all of our whole, core, a company of 150,000 people, how many hours can I ask of them per year? It's not like you can say, excellent, we're going to take everyone off for 5 months to go do an incredible course to come back and start their job. So it's really ask your HR and L&D team, how many hours am I allowed? Maybe it's only, say, 3 hours per year. But then comes the next question, and this is what ties back to the part before, that this is a strategy. What are the key concepts that you need to know by when? Now, we're June right now, so it means if you implemented a sustainability training, it'll probably go live maybe September. You've got 3 months to the end and you're in 2025. And we all know 2025, you're halfway to 2030, and most of you already have 2030 goals for net zero. So when thinking about it, what do I need by the end of this year? What do I need to know by the end of next year? How do I get people to slowly buy into sustainability? Because if you hit someone who's, say, at part A, B, or C on that kind of train, with training that's really relevant for someone who's at M, you're kind of losing time and money on trying to train up someone who's maybe not yet ready, they're not yet leaned in. Do they understand why it's important and why it's actually just important for the company? Butterfly. The other point is looking at your strategy in general. When you're focusing on your strategy, you probably already have SBTI goals. Are you FTSE for good? Do you have net zero goals? Have a look at these. So if you have, say, a 2030 strategy, then work your way backwards. Okay, 2030, we need to be scope 1, scope 2 reduced by X. Therefore, what we'll need is everyone upskilled and understood at least what they need to do and why by, say, mid-2027. Therefore, 2027, you've got 2026, 25, you've got about 2.5, maybe 3 years, and you've got 3 hours per year. Therefore, what should be focused on each of those years going forward? Butterfly. The next part is really the types, butterfly. When it looks at it, what type of company do you have? So for example, what number of staff, what location, access to resources, how much time? If you're, say, a startup of, say, 15 people, you're in the same location and you all have computers, excellent. You can think about maybe taking a morning off and having a meeting together. If you're like some of our clients, you've got Schneider Electric or Saint-Gobain, PwC, you've got hundreds of thousands of employees in different locations, different languages, But in a lot of these cases, they all use computers, therefore e-learning's a possibility. But what happens if you have, say, factory workers? So we work with Accor. Accor had to look, if people don't know Accor, it's like one of the larger hotel brands that owns hotels. They split it up into, okay, we've got our support staff, so the people inside that will be, your HR, your procurement, these are computer-based. But then we have our people who work within the hotels. So how do we train them? So they have, their Thursday morning meeting. What can we do with them? So really thinking about the populations you have within your company. Butterfly. The last part, which is probably most important, is looking at the type of training options. Butterfly. And this is the key thing. When it comes down to it, there is no silver bullet. You have to think about combinations. When you're thinking about it, you have to say, okay, am I going to do in-person, one-day seminar, webinar, e-learning? The idea is that maybe you do a range of these. So you use e-learning for, say, everyone for 10,000 people, but the ones that are really keen, you could do some on-day training in certain ways. I mean, if you're a smaller company, then you can use other ways. Like the key point is that you should be looking at this as a patchwork. And lastly, Butterfly. As an ex-teacher, one of my favorite lines by far in the education world is, do you value what you measure, or do you measure what you value? Now, what I mean by this, it's so easy for me to say, yep, I trained all my staff, we did this e-learning, or they all attended this webinar, or they attended, this kind of training. But do we really value that information? I mean, what's the point of the training? Go back to the start and go, the point of this training is I want everyone to know our sustainability strategy, which I've spent as a sustainability consultant in my company. I've spent so much time doing. I want everyone to understand my sustainability strategy, firstly, and I want everyone to know how they can get involved and act and work backwards from that. So when valuing what type of training you're doing, it's looking at, does my staff know how they can support the sustainability team in what they're doing? And that's the kind of key question. And so when looking at what type of training you want to do and what you want to teach, really start focusing on that. Anyway, my name's Lloyd from AXA Climate. I'm ready to kickstart on some of the questions. Sorry about the speed.
Brilliant. Thank you, Celli. I think we've got some great comments in the chat, but yeah, I think that training framework is so super helpful, and the whole point about maintaining it is really key. And I do very much like your not comparing it to normalize it against computer, the sort of digital transformation, because I always love the fact that the stat from COVID there, I think in the first 3 months of COVID, we had 10 years worth of digital adoption. So we can do it. We can get through these things. So thank you for that. So we've got some good questions here, some quite interesting, meaty questions. I've got a couple as well, actually. So if we have time, I might sneak some of mine in. And then Tina has been busy scrolling away, typing some answers. So, but we might just come back so we can have some discussions on these. And then, but we've got some great answers in there too. So let's have a look. So on my panelists, we've got questions in open and answered. So respecting the voting, we've got an anonymous person who has raised the question. Many organizations face the obstacle of having a CFO who sees environmental matters as pure cost and not an opportunity for value creation. What advice do you have for those working in the sustainability practice when trying to influence people in those roles? I guess, Tina, I'll come to you, and then shall we kind of go around?
I think this is an excellent question. Before I get into the answer, if the sound is still intermittent, I'll switch off my camera if that's okay. But Shane,
okay now, I think.
advice if I have to. Now, the only way to get alignment is to show people that you are helping them to deliver on their job. People don't align because people are nice people fundamentally, but everyone is under immense pressure. CFOs unavoidably, they don't just look at P&L, they look at planning, strategy planning, resource planning. This is their job. This is the role of the CFO these days, especially in times of uncertainty. Unavoidably, CFOs and COOs need to work very closely together, because the way that financial planning is executed shows up in in your cash flows, your operational cash flows. So when you show as a sustainability expert, and by sustainability expert, I mean climate and people experts, that you are saving and making money through very targeted, fit for purpose interventions, then how can the CFO not turn around? Is it going to be painful? I promise you it is. It is painful for me. But it's rewarding. The funny thing with change agents, and all of us are change agents here, and I mean, climate is making us push that change agency even faster. But fundamentally speaking, you have to understand where other people are coming from. What are the obstacles in their thinking? Where are they coming from that blocks their minds? Once you assist them in doing their job, there is a momentum effect. There is a steep uphill battle that you have to start with, but momentum comes with it. Once you get momentum, you start getting alignment. Once you get alignment, you get followership. So it's important in these strong words that everyone uses, alignments, this, that, and the other, show what that means in practice. Data, solutions, cost savings, it gets the CFO singing. So there you go.
Thank you. Celli,
to add on to that, quite often the other lever to use is the risk manager. So risk managers are often on the board or associated with it because everyone usually trusts the risk manager. And risk managers are also the easiest ones to convert to understand about systemic or climate risk or climatic risk. And so explaining to a risk manager, so I guess there's three motivations for companies doing things. The first one is morals. Unfortunately, often that's not a driving force, and in the example that you put, it isn't. The next one is risk, or which could either be regulation, so regulatory risk, or could be because of climatic risk. And so getting your risk manager on board and getting them to use the right lingo and words to get you even into the room to the board is a great idea. The third one is always, as Tina pointed out, is always opportunity. So trying to explain about how this, because a lot of them are about how do I'm going to spend money on this. How is this going to make us more money? Sometimes I use the language that I hate using, which is all about you will make more by doing blah, blah, blah. In the end, I care about is that if they do sustainability training, they're learning. And with sustainability training, they'll make the difference. And so sometimes using the language about opportunistic, and you can see your return on investment if you have more tenders being won because they're able to answer these questions, might be also a way to start, getting the wedge in the door. And then after that, always using people as examples within your organization for further pushing the communication. If you have one person who's in their sales saying, I closed a deal because I was able to talk to my client about this, or in procurement, although it was expensive doing this, in the long run, we made savings here. And using that as your case study for your CFO is always really strong.
Well, that's such a great tip. Thank you. I feel like I'm always seeing a kind of a future content piece. It's almost like a top trumps of different roles. And how can we, this is how you need to go. Morals, risk. Okay, I know we've got.
I was going to say, I could build on to that as well, if you don't mind, because I love this topic. Sorry. And I just love that the comments that were made there, and the one of, being able to help them do their job, motivate with risk, and then accelerate with opportunity. I love all of that. And I was, it's only because we've literally just been working with this particular dynamic quite recently, and we find it interesting. And going back to our business integration as well. So I think first starting on that, helping do your job. I think sustainability teams have such an amazing potential relationship with chief financial officers. The deeper and the harder the type of decarbonisation that we're doing, because there is when we have the early low-hanging fruit, there is always the opportunity to be able to pull. But when we start going into the sort of the deep decarbonisation and the risk, it can become a very, very difficult conversation. Which is why your point, Tina, is brilliant. That helps CFOs do their job, because if we have a purpose and we have the strategy, and we're motivating with the risk, if we can get down to materiality and integrated materiality, what we've got here is is the granular information that that an analytical mind like a CFO will need. So if there's such tools as, and I think we're going to talk about it in the next webinar actually, integrated decision-making frameworks, there's one at a board level, there's one at a senior leadership level. But if you can get down to that kind of granularity and work in partnership with your CEO to say, look, so this is 100%, these are your opportunities, but also we've got some trade-offs to talk through here, but I'm going to quantify those trade-offs for you. This is how much of a nature recovery you can make. This is how much of this is your financial return, but it's going to be longer term than you were first expecting, which goes to that sort of tackling the analytical mind, but also focusing on the heart as well. So it's that heart and mind piece. So we could go, so the sustainability team can go through that journey in a very, very granular way and be that sort of sparring partner with the CFO. So he's got the right information, or she's got the right information to be able to make those choices. But that parallel parts piece, and like, what does that mean? What's the enabling culture? Are we learning? Do we understand? Have we got an enabling environment to fail in a CFO's eye, which is CFO's eyes, which is reduce our return on investment for a temporary basis? Those two things together are hopefully what can help push over the line.
I think that's such a good point, Kate, because I do wonder sometimes whether psychologically there's a sense of, we talk about opportunities, but then is there some element of people think opportunities are options, and whereas trade-offs and risk are essentials, we have to deal with them, and maybe we can be more savvy about how we position that piece. We've got a great question from Claire, which I would like to build on too, in that, so Claire has asked, what is your top tip for those of us not at board level, but want to engage with senior leadership to speed up or improve the net zero transformation? And I think that's a really good one, because I'm trying to think, the fairly recent EY CEO survey or research that they kind of, their sort of annual CEO research, I think, I can't remember the stats off the top of my head, but essentially it was, highlighting CEOs are seeing sustainability as more important than last year, which is good. But they're still maybe not seeing it as a immediate, so they're still seeing it as more of a long term. So there is this need to, even if they are seeing it's important, that I'm sure many sustainability professionals are feeling the need to raise that level of urgency. So yeah, who wants to, Celli, do you want to kick off on that one first? So your views.
Yeah. Let me think about it. I'm still thinking about it through. Like, Kate, would you like to go first on that
yeah,
one?
sure.
Sure, it's a difficult one, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is a difficult one.
Yeah, so I was actually just thinking of in almost like the reframe of what we've just said in the last call, but taking it from there, because I was trying to get myself into a position then of, let's say, for instance, I'm a sustainability director or a sustainability manager, and how do I engage people? And I think points made both by Celli and Tina in the last point of risk as your, I see risk as the sort of the motivator and opportunity as the accelerator, and I always, and maybe it's just the way my mind works, but it's the quantifying. So risk is your quantifying the risk so it feels tangible, so you can actually get a sense around it, and then accelerating with the opportunity. And again, it's just how tangible can we make it? And I think so. It's the same principle, I'd say. I haven't got a specific top tip, but just those two dynamics help.
Tina.
I do, and Kate, you do too. But probably you need two extra minutes. Raise your hand. Send that email. Don't be afraid. You are the expert. Leaders need expertise. They're not, how many things do you think a CEO can do? What do you expect of that CEO? What do you expect of that CFO? You're the expert. Put your hand up. It's unfortunate that a lot of businesses are very hierarchical. Why? Because when there's so much uncertainty, you need decentralization. Now, the people that do go through the decentralization process, well done them. The other ones that don't, you have to help them. So if you were the leader, what would you do? Think of it that way. Type that email, give the data, explain what that does, how much money that saves, how much money that makes. Everyone loves principles, but unfortunately principles are not, they're very confusing in this very politically polarized times. But money talks universally, right? So when you try things to people, when you help to get invited to a committee, put your hand up. can I please help you by providing testimonial to that committee? Or even if we write something and say, hey, boss, you're going to that committee. Can you please, do you think it might make sense to convey that message? Then you help to get the right information to the right place for the right decisions to be made. So don't create yourselves artificial barriers. You have the expertise, put your hand up. There you go.
I've just seen we've had a little flurry of questions, so we'll move on to the next one, and we've got quite a few in our little open category. So being democratic and respecting the voting, the next question we've got is from Finley Johnson, who is asking, what advice does the panel have for engaging other departments with sustainability initiatives in organisations with a siloed culture, particularly if the why isn't yet filtered down from senior management? Could you also expand on how to communicate why sustainability initiatives help with the functional objectives of departments with those organisations? Kate or Celli, do you want to come in on that one from your experience?
Yeah, I guess I'll start with, I can definitely start with that, engaging with the different departments, is I think a lot of the time, departments sometimes don't understand why it's relevant to them. If you just say, okay, I've got HR training, off you go, it's trying to find specifically how is it going to help the HR team, or for the risk team, it's talking about how it will specifically affect the risk team. And with that, go with examples that have already happened. Like there are enough examples that have already happened. So for example, if you're looking at your marketing team, if it hasn't already hit that you've said something that's either accused of greenwashing or green hushing online, then there will definitely be a competitor who is doing well or doing a lot worse because they've been hit by this. And being like, listen, this team over here at this company, company X, they've done this, this, and this. I want to safeguard us, or I want to get in front like them. Therefore, let's start thinking about this. And so part of it is actually looking at your both looking at what's already happened, like in 2015, if you were in the UK and you were a business, it's likely that you were affected by the 2 servers that went down by Oracle and Google. And so talking to your risk team and talking to your IT team, being like, hey, just wondering where is our where is our cloud backed up and how is that being powered at the moment? And the last point, I guess, on this one is senior management is once you've the hardest part is getting senior management on, but once you have is using them. And I think I'll talk about this for Eva's question a little bit later on. But anyway, that's my 2 cents for the start.
That sounds good. Well, actually, because let's move on to Eva's question. Yes, which is to you, Celli. So, can you give an example of how to get training into people's agenda when people are constantly swamped with work, and exec management does not see the leadership? That's such a great question. So yes, and a great barrier. Have you got the magic answer,
Yeah.
Celli?
So, I mean, the best kind of example would be if you've got your management on board, or if you have got it there, then the idea is that you need to okay, let's start with this. If you just start with training, you're going to have, of the people, you're going to have 10% of people who are just going to jump into it and do it. Why? Because they're excited, probably externally, about sustainability. They want to get involved and they like learning. They're also probably under the age of 35. Then you've got maybe, say, 15% of your company who have no interest in doing it. They probably are anti-learning. I've done this for years. I'm never going to change. And they're probably going to retire soon. But then you've kind of got the group in the middle. And the group in the middle is, how do you get them to move towards doing the training? And a lot of the time, it's how do you make it relevant for them? A lot of the time, someone comes in and goes, listen, I care about the environment, but I work in procurement, or I work in HR, or I work in IT. So like I'm a vegan at home, but now I'm at IT, so I'm going to go and do my job. So it's really about how do you make it specifically relevant to them and tie it in to that. No, this is not about you. This is your role, and your role will change in the next few years. And to show that, it's using a sustainability strategy, being like, listen, we as a company have committed to X by this date. For us to do this, we need to do these steps. And for us to do these steps, we will need everyone to be able to do these. And therefore, we'll need to have to focus on each person learning these parts each year. And I suppose the last part that comes through is thinking about the type of training for them. So for example, maybe they've got busy agendas. So say taking a whole day off to do a certain type of training isn't going to work for that person or that group. So maybe it is doing, say, a 1 hour webinar or something at lunch or e-learning, or maybe they do, you do need that kind of a moment where you get everyone together. So you talk to your company about, when we have our next all hands together, can I give a 10-minute part at the start explaining why this is going to be used? But very, very, very much here, talk to your L&D. Your L&D team, this is their job, is getting the whole company to learn. How have they done it? What is the barriers they've hit? Don't make the same mistakes they've done.
Brilliant. So the next question we have got for you, Tina, also from Eva, asking, can you please give some practical examples on barriers and enablers to lift transition obstacles?
Okay, that's a seminar of it in its own right. But
we'll take notes next year.
Stunning is the amount of disinformation out there and the amount of sensationalism around climate out there. So what I really want to advise, what I'm really doing on my boards as a director and as an advisor, in my advisory capacity, is financial materiality. What does it mean to me? Click off the TV. Don't just grab on the dovetailing on someone who said, oh, climate doesn't exist. Oh, climate does exist. I mean, we're not talking about aliens here. We're talking about what's happening on the ground every day. What does that mean about our footprint? Some supplier went bust because of XYZ. Some supplier has something to deliver for us, but they can't because, there's a flood in that region. These are very specific, tangible things. Even if you're a bank and a bank is a service provider, and I'll switch off my camera, and by consequence, you as a service provider, you don't necessarily have the direct effect of a physical climate risk or manifestation of a climate risk. Well, if it wipes out your whole credit on that obligor, then you inherit that risk by yourself. You don't need that accident to happen in your turf. Look at accidents that are happening in your neighbors, your peer companies, your aspiring companies. Be very specific and very focused about what conversation you are having. That will kill an immense amount of uncertainty, that will focus an immense amount of effort, and it will unlock a lot of things. What does it matter to me? What do I need to do as a result of the climate materiality? How can I best be clear about what I need to do to safeguard the long-term sustainability of my company, as the Companies Act is asking me to do? Simple. Not quite simple.
Thanks, Tina. Did you have anything else on that, Celli, or?
No, that was perfect.
Great. We've got time for one more question, and I quite like, because we've been talking about people, I quite like the fact that Richard Jones had asked about the role of AI in supporting sustainability enabling actions, which I know said, I mean, Tina, yeah, you've sort of shared what's your views on this? Because interestingly, I think that's the EY CEO survey that I talked about earlier. Actually, I think it said that the CEOs were actually prioritizing investment in AI over their sustainability targets. So they obviously are looking at this. But yeah, what's your take on this one, Tina?
What they're hinting at is productivity. But one thing that is critically missing from organizations today is the ability to think on your own ground. If you look at the amount, and I'm an advisor myself, right? So, horse's mouth. The amount of fees that people spend, organizations spend in delegating their own thinking externally is not a very sound practice. So AI that can correlate your data, optimize your data, make your data granular, specific, targeted, credible, complete, have integrity, beautiful, right? Now, how can AI get into writing your own sustainability report? Big red flag. Okay, big red flag. Why? Because you haven't put any thought into it, you haven't put any pain to it, and people that read it notice it. Because guess what? The next door person has done the same. So think about how AI can optimize your data, optimize your communication internally, and optimize the coordination. But there was a beautiful quote on LinkedIn. I want AI to help do my dishes so I can do my thinking and art, not the other way around.
Well said. Okay. Anybody else? Any other? Celli, have you got any thoughts on the whole AI debate? Kate?
Yeah, Kate, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I mean, this is yeah.
Okay, I'm trying to bite my tongue.
Yeah, I can see your face, and I was like, "Oh, I think we're opening a can of worms," and I'm excited by this.
You're amongst friends. It's okay.
I'll try and be quick. But it's really nice actually, because it's a really nice bridge to the next webinar where we're going to be talking about systemic innovation as well. But you're at 100% right, Tina. From a people perspective with AI, there are so many ways that you can apply it to be able to support productivity, be that, and then also just even in the engagement elements that you've got gamification, you've got behavior analytics, sentiment analysis, all that sort of thing, and it's ever more so, hence artificial intelligence becoming more intelligent than us. And then if you apply it outside of the people context over to like different challenges within our decarbonisation journeys, be that within agriculture, precision agriculture, I'm trying to think of all the different ways it's used, resource optimization, etc. That's all wonderful. And hopefully what we'll do is we'll drill down into this in as the next webinar series is very often we go technology first. And we go, okay, so technology is the solution. Technology is what we need to do. And I think what we need to do, and very carefully with AI and any other technology we're applying to the deep decarbonisation challenge, is think about what our outcomes are. And actually, really, there is no one silver bullet. Artificial intelligence is definitely not a silver bullet. It's a whole myriad of different interconnected activities, from technology to policy asks to policy innovation to behaviour change, that will bring about the real change we need to see.
Lovely. Thank you, Kate.
The only thing I was going to add, I think that's perfect. The only thing I would add is don't get perfection get in the way of progress, which is often so many people are like, yep, AI, and I've no doubt AI is going to do some great stuff, but we don't have the time to wait for it to get up to a point to really get started. And I mean, the digital revolution started early 2000, and we're still doing stuff 20 years later, and we don't have 20 years right now to get to make the changes. So start something now, reflect on it, build on it for the next year. Oh, that didn't work. How come? Okay, let me try next year. We'll do this. Don't put all your eggs in the same basket. Try lots of different things. But you have to get started now. And sure, AI will have a place at some point, but don't wait for it.
Well, on that note, that was fabulous. Thank you all. And I think Joshua, I know you had a question about sort of some recommendations for workshops. So we'll make sure we gather some. We have some definitely to share. So thank you, everyone, as we close the session. Thank you for our amazing speakers. Before we let you go, we want to get your input on what is coming up next. Our sixth session is about developing the right conditions around systems and processes. So please let us know in the Slido what you're most interested in learning about on that topic. What would you like to discuss? So we'll give you a second, but please pop your thoughts in, and then we will digest those and make sure we cover them. So what's next? Just to remind you that we have lots of resources for you to stay engaged on this topic. Do have a look at Geeky for lots of employee engagement resources and tools, as well as Carbon Literacy Project, Climate Fresk, there's Aim High Earth, there's lots actually. IEMA also has a guide developed in partnership with Deloitte, which outlines a blueprint for a green workforce transformation. So we probably are actually answering Joshua's question right now. You will get the recording, resources and key takeaways in an email following the session. Please do feel free to share it with your colleagues, and then there'll be another reminder to register for the final 2 sessions. We've got some more engagement coming up. We've got a new webinar series about sustainability reporting that started yesterday. So join us for that, and you can also watch the recording that started. We also have a webinar about creating a sustainability literate workforce coming soon on June the 11th. So this will really explore those engagement strategies to educate, inspire and enable employees across the workforce. So you can sign up for that in the link in the chat. And just one final piece actually is that for anyone here that are Global Compact members, we do have our annual general meeting, which will be in person and hybrid at Accenture's office in London on the 25th of June during London Climate Action Week. We will be joined by Paul Polman, who will be giving us a fireside chat. And we will also have a panel on taking stock and building momentum, looking at how we can accelerate climate action and balance that against short-term pressures, which will feature panelists from Diageo, London Stock Exchange and Orsted. So if you are a member and you would like to join us for that, then there will be a link in the chat. So on that note, we have just slightly run over 1 minute. Thank you again to our wonderful speakers, to all of you joining us today and for your amazing questions and comments in the chat. We really appreciate you taking the time to be here. Survey will pop up when the session ends. Please do let us know how you found the session, any recommendations on how we can improve. And on that note, have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you all. Goodbye.